The terrifying story I'm about to share with you all tonight is something I handpicked, especially for this evening. I've even named it the scariest tale of the week. This chilling experience happened to Troy and his girlfriend at a rental house they once stayed in. This house wasn't just any ordinary house. It was located in a well-known neighborhood. It's been nearly 10 years since this incident. And if you want to know exactly what happened, pay close attention because the story is both frightening and eerie. Who knows, some of you might even be familiar with this neighborhood. Before we dive into our scary story, we would like to ask everyone to like and subscribe to support us in continuing to bring you more terrifying tales in the future. Let's go back nearly 17 years. Troy's girlfriend, who we'll call Nan, had recently changed jobs and was now working in a suburban area. However, her new workplace was quite far from her old home, so she decided to find a cheap rental close to her new job. She came across a townhouse in a certain neighborhood and decided to take a look. The first thing worth mentioning is the price. It was indeed affordable. The monthly rent was only 6,000 baht, which was a great deal at that time. There was no additional maintenance fee, and water and electricity were covered by the municipality. Now, let me paint a picture of this townhouse for you. From the outside, it looked worn out and incredibly run down. Being a townhouse, it had shared walls with neighbors on both sides. The walls were covered in moss and grime. As Nan stepped inside, it was exactly what she expected. Old and deteriorated. The once white walls were stained with dark and yellowish marks, a detail she couldn't quite understand. Why didn't the owner bother to repaint it before renting it out? But since the rent was cheap and she'd only be there temporarily, she didn't dwell on it too much. The layout of the townhouse was typical. 3 bedrooms in total, 1 main bedroom, and 2 smaller ones. The house had 2 bathrooms, 1 on each floor. The main bedroom even had a small balcony that extended outward. On the first day Nan went to view the house, she decided to sign the lease with the owner right away. Despite the house's old and worn-out condition, she felt it was fine overall, especially considering the low rent. 2 days later, it was time for Nan to start moving her belongings in. She loaded smaller essential items onto her car, like clothes and personal supplies, planning to move the larger items later. As Nan reached the house and opened the door with her arms full of clothes, she was immediately hit by a damp, stale odor, an intense musty smell, like the air hadn't circulated in a long time. It felt heavy and damp, a scent all too familiar yet somehow out of place. But there was something even stranger. The house now looked dirtier than when she'd first viewed it just 2 days before. When she had last visited to sign the lease, the place had been reasonably clean. But now, dust and cobwebs covered everything, from the floor to the stair rails. It wasn't excessive, but enough to make her realize the house wasn't ready for her to bring her belongings in just yet. She wasn't sure how to proceed, thinking about how challenging it would be to clean up with all her things scattered about. So she decided to hire a cleaning lady before moving in. Fortunately, she knew a cleaning lady personally, someone who had cleaned her old house many times before. Nan decided to call her and ask if she could come over. At that point, Nan hadn't brought any items into the house. She kept them in her car, planning to return to her mother's house that day and move everything in tomorrow. When Nan called the cleaning lady, the woman mentioned that she had errands to run in the morning but would be free after 3 p.m. Don't worry about locking up, she told Nan. I'll let myself in to clean. Nan agreed, reassuring her that she didn't need to rush since she wasn't planning to stay in the house that night. She just requested that the cleaning be finished by the next day. Late that evening, Close to 7 p.m., Nan received a call from the cleaning lady. "Nan," she asked, "did you or maybe a friend go into the house today?" Nan replied that she hadn't been there and was currently at her mother's. The cleaning lady then explained that when she arrived at the house earlier, she noticed the bedroom light upstairs was on, so she assumed someone was inside. She rang the doorbell several times, but no one came to answer. Thinking Nan or someone else was there, she let herself in to start cleaning. But as she called out Nan's name, no one responded. When she headed upstairs to clean the bedroom, she noticed that the light, which had been on, was now off. Still, she didn't give it much thought and went about her cleaning tasks as usual. She had arrived around 3:30 or 4 p.m., and by the time she finished, it was nearly 7 p.m. But as she was leaving, locking the gate and getting ready to ride her motorbike home, something caught her eye. She thought she saw a figure, the shadow of a woman, standing on the second floor balcony. Initially, she assumed it was Nan, but now, hearing Nan insist that she hadn't been there at all, they both began to feel uneasy. Nan tried to rationalize it, guessing that the cleaning lady might have been mistaken and seen the shadow of a large potted plant on the balcony instead. She thought perhaps the cleaning lady's eyes had played tricks on her. At that time, Nan didn't think much of it and brushed it off as a mere illusion. The morning after the house had been thoroughly cleaned, Nan began moving her things in, focusing only on her smaller, essential items while planning to bring in larger items later. In the living room, there was an old sofa left by the previous owner, large enough to lie down on, so Nan decided to sleep on it for the first few nights. She set up her TV nearby to have something to watch and pass the time. Later that evening, Nan's boyfriend, Troy, called to let her know that after work, he'd come by to take her shopping for any household essentials she might need. As she relaxed and waited for Troy to arrive, she suddenly heard loud thudding sounds coming from upstairs. She couldn't be sure if they were coming from her house or a neighboring one, as the townhouses were all closely connected. Not thinking much of it, she ignored the noise and continued to wait. When Troy finally arrived, Nan, as was her habit, made sure to turn off all the lights and the TV before they left for the store. She'd always been taught since childhood to double-check that everything was off before leaving the house. After finishing their shopping and returning home, she opened the front door only to see that the TV was on. She was certain she had turned it off herself before leaving, so this was strange. Still, she brushed it off, thinking maybe she hadn't fully switched it off or that the switch was faulty. She didn't think much more of it. It's worth noting that Troy didn't actually live with Nan. His job as a sales rep often took him out of town and to the office, so he'd only be able to visit Nan on weekends. After 3 days in the house, Nan began to hear footsteps from above, along with occasional loud thudding noises. Each time she went upstairs to investigate, she'd find nothing. She even pressed her ear to the walls on either side to check if the sounds were coming from the neighboring houses, but there was silence. The noises seemed to be coming from within her own home, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly where. Initially, she didn't think much of it, but as the sounds continued, she started to feel unsettled and decided to invite a close friend over to stay with her for company. Once her friend moved in, strange events started happening more frequently. Late at night, both Nan and her friend would hear the sound of running water coming from the upstairs bathroom, as though someone were using it. But this didn't make sense. There were only the two of them in the house. The sound of footsteps and thuds continued as well, sometimes seeming like someone was walking around upstairs. On one occasion, when they heard water running upstairs, Nan and her friend decided to go check it out. As expected, they found everything perfectly normal. The bathroom floor was completely dry and no signs of recent use. Nan had been sleeping on the downstairs sofa as she still didn't have a mattress or bed. Since she primarily used the downstairs bathroom, the upstairs one hadn't been used at all. With her friend there, Nan felt less afraid. They mostly found the incidents puzzling rather than terrifying, thinking maybe the sounds were coming from the neighboring houses. Once Nan finally got a mattress and moved up to the main bedroom on the second floor, she also started using the upstairs bathroom for convenience. The first few times she showered or washed her hair in there, she felt an eerie sensation at her back, as if someone was watching her the entire time. She tried to convince herself that it was all in her head, a product of her imagination, but the feeling was hard to shake. She eventually mentioned the strange sensation to her friend, admitting how she felt uneasy in the upstairs bathroom. Surprisingly, her friend said she'd felt the same thing, as though someone was constantly watching her. At first, they thought they were each just imagining things, but realizing they'd both felt the same way was unsettling. To calm each other down, they tried to reassure themselves, saying it was probably nothing, just their minds playing tricks as they adjusted to a new house. It turned out that on the first night Nan and her friend slept upstairs, they were startled awake together around midnight, close to 1 a.m. Both of them heard the loud noise of the bathroom door opening and closing. It was such a heavy banging sound, almost as if someone was slamming the door with force. The noise was so loud that Nan felt she had to get up and check. When she went to look, she saw that the bathroom door was shut, but as she tried to open it, she realized that the door was locked from the inside, which shouldn't have been possible. If it was locked from the inside, someone must be in there, right? Seeing that the door was locked, Nan went back to her room to get the key and unlocked the bathroom door. When she opened it, the room was empty, as if nothing had happened. But what struck her as odd was that the ceiling panel in the bathroom was slightly lifted, as though it hadn't been completely closed. She hadn't noticed this before. Given that it was late, and with only women in the house, they decided not to try climbing up to check it out. They thought it best to just call security to fix it in the morning. The following morning, Nan called the security guard to come by. When the guard arrived, he seemed a bit unsettled and nervously asked why she had called for him. Nan explained that the ceiling panel in the bathroom was open and she needed his help to climb up and close it. The guard replied, okay, I'll be right back, then quickly pedaled away on his bicycle. He seemed so nervous that it made Nan wonder if something was wrong. Not long after, the guard returned, bringing another security guard with him. The two guards went into the bathroom with a folding ladder. However, the first guard hesitated at the door, clearly reluctant to go inside. He climbed the ladder to close the panel, but seemed eager to get it done quickly, not even glancing up at the ceiling. As soon as the panel was secured, he quickly stepped out of the bathroom, saying, "All done. I'll be on my way now," and promptly left the house. Nan was puzzled by how quickly he left and how nervous he seemed, but she didn't dwell on it, figuring it was no big deal since the work was finished. The next day was Saturday, so Troy was coming over. She decided she would tell him about all these strange occurrences in the house. That night, as she went to bed, she heard the usual noises she'd grown accustomed to, the occasional thuds and what sounded like someone using the bathroom. By now, she'd gotten used to it and assumed it must be coming from the neighboring house. After all, in townhouses, the walls are connected, so sounds from one house can often be heard in another. The next morning, as she was about to take a shower, She noticed the bathroom ceiling panel was once again slightly open. Despite the guard securing it the day before, it was partially lifted again. Annoyed, she decided not to call the guard again, thinking she'd wait for Troy to arrive in the evening and ask him to take a look. When Troy arrived that evening, Nan recounted all the strange incidents she'd experienced in the house and told him about the ceiling panel in the bathroom. She asked him to help close it, explaining that she'd had the guard fix it already, but it had somehow opened again. Troy felt uneasy upon hearing this, especially since Nan and her friend were the only ones in the house, and he worried about their safety. He wondered if it was possible for someone from a neighboring unit to have tampered with the ceiling panel from above. Concerned, he imagined various scenarios, but eventually said, "All right, I'll climb up and check it out." Nan called the security guard once more to borrow the folding ladder. When the guard brought it, he asked what they needed it for again. Nan didn't mention the ceiling panel, telling him only that they needed it to change a light bulb. The guard nodded, handed over the ladder, and left. Troy then set up the ladder in the bathroom and prepared to climb up. He turned on the flashlight on his phone as he started to climb, while Nan held the ladder steady from below. What I'm about to tell you, please listen closely to understand exactly what Troy found up there above the ceiling. The first thing Troy's flashlight revealed was an old, brittle garland, dry and large, just lying there. Beside the garland, he saw a small old incense pot. Inside the pot were 4 or 5 burnt incense sticks. Seeing this made him freeze with shock. He was stunned but didn't want to say anything, fearing Nan, who was holding the ladder below, would hear and get scared. At that moment, he was at a loss for what to do, whether to remove those items before closing the ceiling panel or just leave them there. While thinking this over, Troy climbed down the ladder, pretending that dust had gotten in his eyes. He needed a moment to decide what to do. Ultimately, he thought, let's leave it for now. If Nan finds out now, she'll be terrified. I'll wait for a more appropriate time, maybe during the day, to bring it up and remove the items. Troy then climbed up again to close the ceiling. But this time, when he shone his flashlight upwards, he saw something beyond the incense pot and dried garland. A woman's face. Her expression was terrifying, with long hair, a pale white face, and eyes staring directly at him. He could only see her face. Her body wasn't visible, just her head. That sight left him paralyzed in shock, causing his phone and flashlight to slip from his hands and fall to the floor. When Nan saw this, she screamed, "Troy, are you okay?" Troy was too shocked to speak immediately. After a moment, he composed himself and told her, "Nan, let's go out for dinner after I close this panel." Nan agreed, helping him up, not realizing that his reason for wanting to leave was because he couldn't bear to stay in that house any longer. He couldn't tell Nan what he had seen, as it would frighten her terribly, and it was late in the evening. After they left to have dinner, they returned home later that night around 10:30 or 11 p.m. As everyone was getting ready for bed, Troy found himself unable to sleep, haunted by what he had seen. He glanced over at Nan, who had already fallen asleep, but he remained restless. A short while later, he heard the thudding sound again. Thump, 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 as if someone was moving about in the bathroom. Hearing this only deepened his fear, as he now knew that the sound wasn't coming from a neighbor's house, but rather from their own bathroom. Despite his fear, he forced himself to keep his eyes closed and eventually drifted off. That night, he had a dream. In his dream, a woman walked up to his bedside and leaned down to whisper in his ear, saying, "You know now, don't you? You've seen it, haven't you? If you understand, then leave. The moment he dreamed this, he jolted awake, and by then, it was already morning. That day, Troy was determined to tell Nan about what he had seen, heard, and dreamed. Later in the morning, around 9 or 10 a.m., Troy took Nan out for breakfast at a nearby restaurant, choosing a small, long-established roadside eatery just outside their neighborhood, a place that looked like it had been there for a long time. When they went to order food, Troy asked the restaurant owner, "Auntie, do you know if anyone ever died in that neighborhood?" The moment she heard his question, she paused, laughed softly, and answered, "Yes, in that neighborhood, someone was once murdered. A man stabbed a woman to death and then hid her body. But in the end, he couldn't escape. The police caught him. This happened a long time ago, though. I don't know exactly which house it was. Why do you ask? Is something wrong?" Troy quickly replied, "Oh, it's nothing, Auntie. I just heard some of the neighbors talking and thought I'd ask you about it." "Thank you very much." Nan was puzzled by why Troy was asking the lady such a question. But Troy immediately cut in, saying, "You heard what she said, right? That's our house." He then explained everything he had experienced, from the things he'd seen in the ceiling to the haunting dream he had. He described every detail, from the old garland, the small incense pot, and the face of the woman staring down at him from above the ceiling. He shared every bit of it in vivid detail. Once Nan knew the full story, she was filled with fear and could no longer bear to stay in that house. She decided to move out, not even asking for her deposit back. When she was preparing to leave, she asked the landlord about it, mentioning that her boyfriend had experienced some terrifying things there. The landlord, however, acted as though he didn't know anything about it, claiming he was unaware of any incidents. He explained that he had bought the house from someone else and was just renting it out. In the end, Nan moved out and left the deposit behind. After moving to another place, she never experienced anything like that again. And that's the whole story of what Troy and Nan encountered in a neighborhood near Bang Yai. They were really lucky, especially Nan, who only heard sounds and didn't see what was actually up there. But from Troy's perspective, imagine climbing up and discovering dry flowers, an old garland, an incense pot, and worst of all, the face of a woman staring right at him from above. I honestly don't think I could handle that. Close your eyes and try to picture it for a moment. Lifting your head up into the ceiling only to find a woman's head staring straight at you. How would that feel? For anyone with a faint heart, it would be enough to scare them to death. I know if it were me, I'd be completely shaken if I saw something like that. This story is honestly terrifying. Just imagine a haunted rental house, a place you call home, with a spirit lingering inside. It's spine-chilling. If any of you have listened this far, share your thoughts in the comments, or if you've had experiences similar to Troy and Nan, feel free to share them below. I really enjoy reading all your comments, and I make it a point to reply to each one. For those of you who are new here and enjoy scary stories, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. I'll see you next time. For tonight, good night, everyone.